Afternoon. National Assembly for Wales is now in session, and the first item this afternoon are questions to the First Minister. And question one is Simon Thomas.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. What discussions has the First Minister held with the UK Government regarding the devolution of further powers to Wales? A number of discussions have taken place over the past few weeks and months, as I would have hoped, First Minister. One example of where devolution or claimed devolution has been a success for Wales is the devolution of policing and the creation of the Police and Crime Commissions, because that's led to more important decisions for us here in Wales taken out with Wales. If you look at the recent example of the helicopter in Dyfed Powys at Pembrey being removed by decision taken outside of Wales, in your view, will policing be devolved following the next Westminster general election? Well, I can't answer for other parties, of course, but in terms of my party, the commitment has been made to devolve policing in terms of the structure of the police force in Wales and the power to decide as to whether we should have commissioners or not, and it's something that we should welcome.
Davis.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's clear that further powers will be devolved to Wales in the near future, but it's also crucial that we see powers devolved from this place to communities across Wales. And under those circumstances, can you confirm whether you will, if you continue to be First Minister over the next few years, that you will ensure that further powers will be devolved so that they are closer to the people? And what discussions have you had with the Secretary of State for Wales in terms of the devolution of powers to communities across Wales? Well, that would be a matter for the Secretary of State for Wales. Of course, that's non-devolved. In terms of the restructuring of local government in Wales, we will be in a position to decide what powers to provide to them and to town community councils too. One of the things that the white paper mentions, of course, is how we can devolve powers to them. We can't treat them all in the same way because of the different sizes of the councils themselves, but I am in favour of ensuring that we can devolve down to communities where that's possible.
Question two, Sandy Mewis.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, will you make a statement on the impact unnecessary 999 call-outs are having on emergency ambulance services in North Wales?
Well, they place additional pressure on ambulance services across the whole of Wales, diverting resources away, of course, from life-threatening incidences. We do continue to encourage members of the public to use Choose Well and, of course, to only use the 999 services for genuine medical emergencies.
Thank you for that. I welcome the £11 million investment recently announced to improve the performance of the ambulance service, but new figures show that 1 in 6 calls in North Wales last year could have been dealt with by another NHS service. What other initiative, apart from the Choose Well campaign, are being taken to reduce the number of these unnecessary 999 calls, which will ease the pressure on the ambulance service and ensure patients get the treatments that they actually need?
Well, 3 things. Choose Well, which the member has referred to, making sure that people understand that the first place to go in many instances is a pharmacy, and then, of course, possibly a practice nurse, GP, and so forth, but also using 111 as a service rather than 999 to obtain medical advice to see whether, in fact, a 999 call is needed, and, of course, improving access to GPs. We've seen great progress in that regard since 2012.
Antoinette Sandbach.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, with the proposed changes that Ysbyty Gwan Clwyd in relation to maternity obstetrics and gynecology, what assessment have you made of the additional pressures on the ambulance service in North Wales in respect of mothers that may need to be transported? We know that 46% of new mothers maybe need to be transported from an all-midwife-led unit, and 10% of mothers anticipating normal birth. So what measures have you taken to assess that impact?
Well, it's a matter, of course, for the local health board. There will undoubtedly be an impact in terms of having to take some mothers from the area to Wrexham and to Bangor, and that's why, of course, it's absolutely essential that the current situation at Glan-Clwyd is purely temporary.
Claire Griffith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Certainly unnecessary calls do contribute to the problem, but the truth is that the number of fake calls has fallen from 2,500 5 years ago to some 1,200, so that figure has halved over that period of 5 years. And isn't it true to say that some of the problems and the major problems of the ambulance service are based on the failure of your government to plan services in a way that actually responds to demand as it actually exists?
Well, that's what we're doing, of course, and his party has actually opposed some of the changes that have taken place. We want to ensure, of course, that people can receive treatment as close to their homes as possible, and we must also ensure that that treatment is safe, and we must ensure that specialism is available to do that.
Leaders, and first this afternoon, the Leader of the Opposition, Andrew Davies.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. First Minister, 2 weeks ago I asked you about the maternity changes that were proposed by the Health Board in North Wales around Ysbyty Glan-Clwyd. You said that by the summer of 2016 those services should be reinstated. A couple of days later, the Health Minister then drew attention to what he believed it was a 12-month delay for these services to be reinstated. The Health Board have said that it could be as late as 2017 when the new intensive care unit is established. Who is correct? Because if you take any one of those dates, it is deeply troubling for anyone with maternity services who care about them in North Wales.
Let me be quite clear. We expect those services to be restored within 12 months. I have seen the reference to 18 months and beyond. We do not accept that. The local health board must ensure that they're in a position to restore those services in the 12-month period that was originally envisaged.
Thank you for that very clear answer, First Minister. So certainly residents in North Wales can expect to have the service back up to a consultant-led level this time next year without a shadow of a doubt. In my view, that's a 12-month period. But the other concern came out last week when the medical director talked about, I think the words he used was sleepwalking into disaster if there wasn't a centralisation of existing services, i.e. downgrading of services at district general hospitals. Do you identify with the proposals that he has put forward, and can you see services being taken away from district general hospitals across North Wales?
No, what I can envisage is when the Cernic is established at Glan-Clwyd, and let me make it absolutely clear that Glan-Clwyd is the site that the Cernic will be established at, then there will be a need to examine services in Bangor and Wrexham in relation to what's provided then at the Cernic. But it has been made absolutely clear, and I make this point again to the local health board, we expect that service to be restored within 12 months. This cannot be anything other than a temporary situation.
I think in fairness, in respect of the medical director, he was talking more generally about services across the DGHs across the whole of North Wales and the existence of services to be provided on all 3 sites. So I accept your assurances about the service being replaced within 12 months' time. I hope the Health Board are listening, because certainly that's not the timeline that people have been given in other areas. But obviously the medical director was talking specifically about the removal of other services at the District General Hospitals across North Wales. Is it your understanding that in 18 months' time, the District General Hospitals in North Wales will be providing the full array of services that you would typically identify with a District General Hospital?
There is no reason to suppose otherwise, and I understand how difficult this issue is for the people who live around Glan-Clwyd. I know, for example, that the Daily Post have been particularly concerned and the issues that they have raised on behalf of members of the public and indeed members themselves within this chamber, and Jones, and I mentioned Darren Mill, of course, in that regard. What I can say is that when the Cernic is established, yes, there will be a need to look at some of the services that the other DGHs provide because of the services that would then be available in the Cernic. But I do not anticipate there being major service changes in Betsy Cadwallader in the meantime, while what has to be a temporary situation at Glan-Clwyd is resolved.
We now move to the Leader of the Welsh Liberal Democrats, Kirsty Williams.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, city deals have brought investment and opportunities to cities like Glasgow and Sheffield, with billions of pounds of UK government being spent and invested. What discussions have you had and your government with Cardiff Council to help them design a bid for their own city deal?
It's ultimately a matter, of course, for Cardiff Council. I know that the original understanding was that city deal money was available for English cities. That was until Glasgow, of course, received that money. And I do understand the Minister has written to the appropriate UK Government Minister requesting further information on how this could be taken forward.
Thank you, First Minister. The last we heard anything about a city deal from your Labour colleagues on Cardiff Council, who you say need to be at the forefront of this discussion, was in November, and there has been no developments since. Perhaps the reason that no progress has been made is because, in the words of Cardiff's Labour MP Stephen Doughty, your party's running of the capital city is, and I quote, appalling. What confidence do you have in the Labour administration to bring the millions of pounds of investment that a city deal would bring to our capital city?
Every confidence, working, of course, within the City Region Board. That much is important as well, and the Leader of the Liberal Democrats will know that the report recently published suggests there may be a potential role for a city deal, but there needs to be a regional consensus in terms of developing a viable proposal for the future. I also see, of course, the work that Cardiff have done in terms of the Great Western Cities Initiative, and I'm fully confident that Cardiff is well able to work closely with authorities around it, and indeed those across the border, for the benefit of all.
I'm glad to hear, First Minister, that you have confidence about the ability of the leadership of Cardiff to deliver on a city deal, because your own Deputy Minister sitting behind you claimed that he had been actively misled by the Labour leadership of the Council in recent events. Now, a city deal could be a real engine for regenerating not just Cardiff, but the wider region. Why should anyone have faith in the leadership of Cardiff City Council when your MPs don't, Vaughan Gethin, the Deputy Minister, doesn't, and a sizable number of the Labour councillors on the Council indeed don't seem to?
But the electorate do, don't they? And we've seen the result that happened in Cardiff in 2012, and indeed all by-elections since, which show that there is certainly a strong level of support for the Labour administration running Cardiff City. I have full confidence that they are well able to deliver the economic benefits that the people of Cardiff would expect.
We now move to the Leader of Plaid Cymru, Leanne Wood.
Diolch, Llywyd. First Minister, Heriot-Watt University have published findings showing that 30% of people in Wales struggle with mental and physical pain that is associated with chronic illness. Now, your government has responded by saying that you would encourage people to work with health and voluntary organisations. Can you tell us what exactly does that mean for the 800,000 people currently in pain in Wales today?
Well, ultimately, of course, I'd expect somebody to seek medical advice in terms of the pain that they're in. It's very difficult to give a blanket response because it depends on the individual's condition. Nevertheless, I believe certainly that the health service is well able to offer the right level of pain relief to people, although for some people their conditions will be more difficult than others.
I doubt that will offer much comfort to people, First Minister. I'd like to tell you about a case of mine, someone who contacted me about a case where there was a cursory examination by a GP. The woman was prescribed paracetamol, referred for an x-ray, and told that such pain happens at a certain age. A few days later, this 60-year-old constituent was in more pain, unable to walk, and sought advice from out-of-hours help. Her GP told her that she needed an ultrasound scan, but that there could be up to a 10-month wait before that scan was carried out. The GP then suggested that the patient might consider private medicine, as the tests would then be done much quicker. First Minister, are you concerned that people are being forced to go private because they cannot cope with distressing pain for long periods of time?
Well, the Leader of Plaid Cymru has offered one example. I'm not in a position to contradict her. I don't know the person's background, of course. It sounded from what she was saying at the beginning that the complaint was against the GP rather than government in terms of the way the person had been handled at the outset. Now, without knowing the full facts surrounding the case, and I have no reason to doubt what she or her constituent are saying, it's very difficult to offer a view on an individual. However, of course, if she wants to provide me with details about the particular case, we'd be more than happy to examine them.
It's not okay, First Minister, to have to wait 10 months on the NHS. What patients want now, especially the 800,000 people who are living in pain, is a clear indication from you that things are going to get better and not worse. Now, your party is expected to unleash a further £1 billion worth of cuts to the Welsh budget if it wins the election in May. Is it not the case that as waiting lists increase, as more people are forced to live with pain for longer, more people will be going private? Is it not the case that while there is open privatisation of the NHS in England, there is hidden privatisation by the back door here in Wales?
Well, I mean, first of all, the suggestion that there's going to be £1 billion of the cuts to the Welsh budget is nonsense. And I would challenge the Leader of Plaid Cymru. She does this quite often. I challenge the Leader of Plaid Cymru to produce those figures so people can see £1 billion worth. £1 billion of the cuts she is saying. I do not accept that for one moment. I have to say that she talks about privatisation. There is no evidence of privatisation in the Welsh NHS. We are committed to public services. We have seen, for example, pay deals that have been more favourable to staff that we very much cherish working in the NHS. We have ensured, for example, that our district general hospitals are providing the services that we think they should. We know that 9 out of 10 people do get a good service from the Welsh NHS, but it's important to focus on the 1 out of 10 people, and her constituent might well be one of those people, who don't get the service perhaps that they deserve. And that is where our efforts will be focused in the future, to make sure that those people get that service. Now, what Plaid Cymru need to explain, of course, well, I'm not going to put a question to them today, but what Plaid Cymru will need to explain over the course of the next few weeks is, if they complain about the financial situation, where then would they get the money from?
We now move back to questions on the agenda, and it's question 3, Eluned Parrott.
Cyflwynir. Will the First Minister make a statement on the Cardiff City region?
Yes, good progress is being made with the City region, and they published their vision for the growth of the region earlier this month.
Thank you, First Minister. Just 2 weeks ago, you indicated that applying for a city deal for Cardiff would be a matter for that City Region Board, not the local authorities, and you said that you would be supportive of them in that. The following day, your Economy Minister then confirmed that discussions had taken place along those lines. However, I am therefore surprised that today you seem to be suggesting that it is Cardiff Council that will be taking that matter forward. Can I ask, who has been involved in these discussions? And if it is to be Cardiff Council now leading the charge for the Cardiff City region, how will the people of the rest of the City region hold this programme democratically to account?
That seems to be completely different to what was said by her leader. But there we are. I'll try to answer her question. The reality is this, that Cardiff City, working with the other regions around the city, are in a position, should they wish to, apply for a city deal. Bear in mind, of course, that if I remember rightly, it was Glasgow and the Clyde Valley that formed part of the city deal in Scotland, not just, and I think, the city of Glasgow itself. So yes, the board itself can consider applying for a city deal. There's no difficulty in that, and it's something certainly as a government we are keen to support.
Andrew Archie-Davis.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Obviously, for the City region to succeed, the proposals that are outlined in its report obviously need to be taken forward and enacted. I believe the report didn't have any clear recommendations, it just had bold aspirations. Do you not believe that the model of the Cardiff Bay Regeneration Board, when it regenerated this particular part of Cardiff, could be a good model to work off, especially around statutory powers, for example, to make sure that some of the proposals that are contained within the report and some of the aspirations of the board are carried through, rather than just being another bit of paper sitting on many desks across South East Wales?
I would not be in favour of setting up another quango with all the costs that would involve. I think it's perfectly possible for the local authorities to work together, and indeed with us, to get the positive change that people would expect in the city region.
Question 4, Susie Davis.
How does the Welsh Government plan to support calls for a trial for safe standing at football stadia in Wales?
Well, these are matters, of course, for DCMS and the Sports Ground Safety Authority. They're not devolved to Wales.
Well, I appreciate that, First Minister. That's why I asked what you could do to support calls for a trial for safe standing. As you know, the leader of the Welsh Conservatives has done just that with Football Supporters Federation and meeting Swansea and City Cardiff fans, all of whom support a safe standing trial. He's approached the UK Minister. The league clubs wish to lobby the UK Government on that issue. So will you join those voices, which actually backs the Assembly's voice, with a view to getting an effective trial here in Wales?
I understand the point, but I think we should be cautious. We've got to bear in mind that it was after a series of disasters in the 80s involving old stadia, that's true, not stadia that we have now, that we had the Taylor Report and all-seater grounds, and we should bear that in mind. It's true to say that there are some sports grounds in Wales of significant size. Parc y Sgal has been one of them that do have standing areas. That much is true, and all of the Welsh Premiership football teams, they all have standing areas, as indeed do the Premiership rugby clubs. It's a matter ultimately for the Premier League and for the international football bodies particularly to consider. What I wouldn't want to see is alterations being made, for example, to the Cardiff City Stadium that reduce the capacity of the stadium for international matches where standing is not allowed. So that's something that would need to be borne in mind. It's not something that I would be averse to as somebody who spent many years standing on terraces over the years, getting wet in more ways than one. But I think this is the sort of thing that should be proceeded with very carefully, given, of course, the difficult history that we've had with some of the old stadia that existed in the past.
Mike Hedges.
As somebody who also stood on the North Bank at the Vetch Field in the dark days when crowds were quite small there. I still have the mental and emotional scars from Hillsborough and Hazel, and it must never be forgotten that people, including children, died at those sporting events. If it's safe standing is going to be trialled, and I don't actually believe you can have safe standing, but that's a personal opinion. Will the First Minister ensure that it is fully tested against both crushing and charging, which were the two causes of Hillsborough and Hazel, prior to any licensing taking place?
I think it's essential because what we have to remember is that the newer football grounds particularly were not designed to have standing areas. If we take out some of the seats or you introduce the rail seating, some of the Bundesliga clubs have, a full assessment would have to be made of how that would operate. And at the moment, of course, that wouldn't be possible given the fact that the Premier League, for example, requires all-seater stadia. Same for international matches. So the balance has to be struck between the understandable concerns of fans, and I understand where they're coming from, up against, of course, the need to ensure safety and the need to ensure that particularly the football grounds are big enough to host the international matches.
Bethan Jenkins.
First Minister, as has been mentioned, we have obviously looked at Hillsborough and other disasters, but it is cited as evidence, whereas it was overcrowding, stadium layout and poor policing, not with regards to safe standing. So I think we should look at this debate in the here and now. And as has been mentioned, in German clubs, they do bolt-on temporary seats on terraces, and they remove crush barriers. So these then allow, and could allow, Swansea and Cardiff to then be applicable then for, to put the seats back on for Champions League matches, and for example. So have you had any discussions with the Football Supporters Association about this? Because, league clubs in Wales are supportive of this concept, and we would like to see you take this matter on further. Well, I've not been approached by anybody. I'm not sure if any of the ministers have. I think possibly one minister has may have been involved in discussions on this issue, but certainly it's something that would interest us in terms of practical proposals, how that might be taken forward.
Alan Roberts.
There are, of course, stadia in Austria, never mind Germany, where international matches are staged, where they do have safe standing areas. Can I ask you to consider, given that the most famous COP in Britain, namely the COP on the racecourse in Wrexham, has been closed over a number of years, there has been a problem in attracting international matches to North Wales. As you consider your response, maybe you could hold discussions with Glyndŵr University and the football club to see whether we could look at that stadium as an example.
I would truly like to see international matches coming back to North Wales. I remember the games in the 80s and 90s, and there was very strong support for the Welsh team in North Wales. At present, of course, because of the condition of the racecourse at present and the numbers of people that can actually attend, it's very difficult at present, but it would be good to see that again, and it's something for the University of Glyndŵr to consider whether they want to see the racecourse becoming an international.
Will the First Minister make a statement on the protection of NHS patients' personal information?
Yes, the Data Protection Act 1998 classifies medical information as sensitive personal information, and as such requires organisations to apply strict controls on the use of patient medical information.
Thank you, First Minister. We're all aware that NHS employees are bound by the Code of Confidentiality and the Data Protection Act. This isn't reassuring, however, for a patient in my constituency that I'm currently dealing with and have had correspondence with the Health Minister about. The patient in question has been contacted by a charitable organisation that was aware of the treatment she had recently been receiving, even when her closest friends and family had not been aware of that. Whilst I appreciate that some organisations providing palliative care such as Marie Curie Macmillan, may have a degree of access to patients' records. This particular charity didn't fall into that particular parameter. I have raised this matter with the Health Minister, as I've said. What reassurances are you able to offer Welsh patients and their families in this matter, and how will you robustly ensure that personal information is closely protected as much as possible, and that patients in future are not put in the position that my constituent has been?
I'm aware of the allegations. Nothing as yet has been produced to support the allegations, as yet. But I can say, as the member knows, I know he tabled a number of written questions to the Minister, that the Minister has written to the Chief Executives of 2 local health boards to investigate if any patient information has been shared with third parties without a patient's prior permission, and those responses are awaited.
Ellen Jones.
Prif Weinidog,
First Minister, one of the unfortunate complaints I hear from constituents is that when a patient turns up for a hospital appointment, that the information about that patient, the records or the results of tests and so on, aren't available. They've gone missing during that appointment. Do you agree with me, therefore, that we must reach a situation within the NHS where the information about the patient is available anywhere within the NHS where that patient is in attendance, including in A&E?
Well, nobody could argue with that. That's very sensible. But it does happen in some parts of Wales, of course, but it's not consistent throughout the whole of Wales. We would wish to see that consistency throughout Wales for the benefit of not just the patients, but the system itself. If there's any kind of a problem in the system which causes a patient to turn up for an appointment when the information isn't available, then it's a loss all round.
Presiding Officer, patients rightly expect their medical details to remain secret and value the relationship they develop with their healthcare professionals, sometimes over very many years. Those relationships are currently under threat in the community of Llynotted Wells and the surrounding area, with the announcement on Thursday that the GPs intend to close the surgery at Llynotted. For many elderly people, the 13-mile trip to Builthwell simply will mean a meaningful end to their ability to access primary care. What can your government do to ensure that rural surgeries can be maintained and that those people living in it can continue to enjoy the relationship that they've developed with their healthcare professionals?
I can understand the concern, of course, of residents of Llanelwedd Wells about the proposals. Ultimately, of course, GPs are self-employed contractors, and it's for them to explain why they're going to remove a service in this way. I know for members of the public, people don't fully appreciate that is the relationship with a large number of GPs, but it's really for the surgery to explain to people why they feel they have to take this step.
Question 6, Baron Davis.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, will you outline your plans for Welsh public transport network, please?
Yes, they're to be found in the National Transport Plan.
Thank you very much, First Minister. There have been recent calls by the industry experts that the Labour call to renationalise some train services have been deemed unnecessary. Now, we all recognise that there's an argument to say that the current franchise is not delivering value for money for Wales, and far more could be done for passengers. However, this simply reflects perhaps a poor franchise deal rather than a fundamental failure in the model. Now, given the high price of engaging professional railway people rather than civil servants to run our rail services, can you specifically outline the risks that you perceive in abandoning the franchise model?
Well, I have to say, in the days of British Rail, it was railway people who were professionals who were running the rail service, and that is an argument for renationalisation. I wouldn't argue that it should take the same form as it did then, but nevertheless I think it's perfectly right to say that a not-for-profit body to run the Wales and Borders franchise is certainly something we have said that we are considering. And of course, the current UK government is more than happy to run what are in effect nationalised franchises in England on some of the rail services. I think approaching the Wales and Borders franchise with the option of a not-for-profit franchise running the service is perfectly acceptable, I believe, to the vast majority of the people of Wales.
Christine Chapman.
Thank you. First Minister, I was pleased to note in the draft National Transport Plan 2015 that one commitment as a medium to long-term priority was the investigation into the extension of rail services to those communities currently without, with a specific mention of Hirwaun in my constituency. And in Hirwaun, then, the track is already there. Local people feel that the extension of rail services would tackle poor access issues for public transport in the area, and previous studies have made a strong case for this to be done. Now, if this proposal did make it into the revised plan, what would be the next steps in taking this forward?
Well, I can say the Minister at the moment is currently considering the findings of the Cardiff Capital Region Metro report. I'm familiar with the issue with Hirwain and people's feelings in the area. I understand that. What we will do now is undertake further detailed work to evaluate a programme of delivery and also to look at what is possible to deliver given the financial situation that we are in and in terms of what our priorities are. And then, of course, members and the member herself will be updated as that work continues.
Simon Thomas.
Diolch, Llywydd.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. When the rail line between Carmarthen and Aberystwyth was closed, First Minister, the Labour MP at that time, Lister Morgan, said that retaining or keeping that railway open was a wonderful socialist experiment. Would reopening the railway be the same?
Well, of course, it has happened in the Vale, in the Ebble Vale area. That is an area that the council is led by the Labour Party there. I remember the trains coming down that track carrying milk from Castellnewydd, Emlyn, and also from Ciliaeron through Talabont. And of course, that line was taken away very quickly indeed to the north of Aberaeron. And of course, that is something in the long term that we could consider in principle, but reopening the whole track would cost significant sum of money. And of course, it's been lost to the north from Carmarthen, for example. But in principle, it would be wonderful to see that line reopening. But of course, we must remember that they would cost a significant amount of money.
Sue Wessex, the then Welsh Government Minister, attended a turf cutting ceremony at the station in Bracklow. Well, the turf's had plenty of time to grow unfettered since then. It's appeared and disappeared from transport plans ever since. It has reappeared in the last December's draft transport plan, and a fortnight ago it was referenced in the City Region report as a potential new station. But given that people are making decisions on where they're going to base their families, where they're going to base their businesses in the future on the basis of the transport links that are available, how confident can people be that projects such as Bracklow Station, such as Hirwain Station, go ahead once they make it into those transport plans?
The issue of Bracklow is twofold. First of all, capacity issues on the main line with the addition of a new station, given the fact it's very, very close to the existing Bridgend mainline station, literally a few hundred yards away. There is a real issue in terms of where exactly Bracklow Station would be placed, given the fact that Bracklow is mainly on a hill, and it would be at one side of a hill, and where would it be placed between the boundary of Bridgend Town proper and the village of Coitchurch. So Bracklow railway station is, although in principle welcome, it is something that is problematic in terms of the capacity problems that would need to be resolved, and in terms of where the station would actually be placed. And as a member will know, I declare an interest given the fact that I know the area very well indeed.
Question 7, Jenny Rathbone.
What appetite does the Welsh Government have to move to an area-based payment scheme for Pillar 1 of the Common Agricultural Policy?
Well, we have to move to an area-based payment scheme, and we will be consulting on the payment options for the new basic payment scheme in March.
The current scheme seems to be fundamentally inequitable, whereby, based on historic activity back in 2000 to 2002, people on the same type of farm with the same type of topography, one person could be paid £50,000, another £5,000 or even less. And it seems that these Pillar 1 payments are being sold, bought and traded just like hedge funds, so that the current system seems to be totally inequitable. And how quickly can we move to an area-based system where we actually stimulate the growing of fruit and vegetables, which is in short supply, particularly in South Wales?
Indeed. I was the minister who set up the historic, and rightly so at the time, because we knew back at the beginning of the last decade that to move straight to an area-based payment system would A, be very complicated, and we saw the difficulties in England over that with their payments, and B, would be an enormous change as far as farmers were concerned, in terms of there being a number of big losers and a number of big winners, and that was not a situation I was prepared to tolerate. That said, of course, that's some years ago now, and it doesn't make much sense to pay people based on activities that were taking place in some instances 12 or 13 years ago. So it was inevitable, and we knew this at the time, that the historic basis would go. And we know, of course, we're consulting on the move to area-based payments, which is something we are obliged to do now, with the intention, of course, of getting the right system for Wales in the future.
Russell George.
First Minister, the Welsh Government is considering a flat rate model, but given the fact that a single flat rate model was discounted from previous models for the basic payment scheme due to the level of disruption, can I ask you what action is the Welsh Government considering to offset the difficulties which the industry will be faced with if this option is taken forward?
Well, there is no option but to move to an area-based system. The CAP regulations state that that has to be done. What we want to do is to move to a system that is the least disruptive system possible to move to. There will be some winners and there will be some losers. That's inevitable under any new system. But we can't keep a system that was intended to work in the early part of the last decade as we look into the early part of, or the middle part now of this decade. It makes no sense to pay people according to what they might have been doing, well, it could be 14, 15 years ago. So therefore, the intention is to move to a system that's new, yes, but is as least disruptive as possible.
Roger Glyn Thomas.
Prif Weinidog.
First Minister, will you confirm once again this afternoon that the Common Agricultural Policy Scheme and the payments that follow from that are vital in order to sustain the agricultural industry in Wales? And also, in your negotiations with Europe, will you ensure that we follow the fundamental principle of these payments, that they are there to sustain rural communities, to make them viable and to give people the opportunity to stay and work in those communities?
Well, yes, that's true. We know, of course, of farming in Wales that without the payments, most of the farms would close down. We know that. That's an economic reality, and that's why I've always argued that the payment is a social community payment to ensure that funding comes in. It's using farmers as the recipient perhaps, but the funding is provided to our rural areas, and that's something we fully understand. And any system that is implemented in Wales, or any system that we move towards in Wales, then we must ensure that that system is relevant to Wales. Historically, that's exactly what has happened.
Question 8, Julie Morgan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. What discussions has the First Minister had concerning the latest University of York study regarding the approval of expensive drugs?
Yes, the study validates our position that a cancer drug fund is inequitable and disadvantages those with other life-limiting conditions.
I thank the First Minister for that response, and I note that he agrees that with the report that says the Special Cancer Fund drug in England is poor value, diverts money from other patient services, helps less people, and does he agree that the Welsh approach is much more effective and has much better outcomes for many more people?
More money spent on cancer treatment, quicker to see a cancer specialist, quicker availability of drugs that are approved by NICE. These are all things that we can be proud of in Wales. And we know, you don't have to take my word for it, we know from the King's Fund, we know from the Bristol study, we've known from what's been written in the British Medical Journal, that the Cancer Drugs Fund does not enjoy the support of the vast majority of the medical profession. On top of that, of course, we know the Cancer Drugs Fund is now being slowly choked off in England because of the number of drugs that are being removed from that fund.
Jonathan Saunders.
Thank you. First Minister, here in Wales, under your government, too many are now denied the chance of vital life-saving drugs if deemed too expensive. Thousands have signed the petition in support of Irvon Williams of North Wales, called the Fighting Chance, who, if he moves to England, will actually receive the life-prolonging drugs that he requires. Are you not ashamed, as the First Minister of Wales, that people are potentially dying as a result of your government and its inability to provide your Welsh patients with a fighting chance?
I challenge the Conservative Party to name a single life-saving drug that exists in the Cancer Drugs Fund in England. There aren't any. They are drugs that are prolonging, she says. No. She was emotive about this. She said there are people dying. Dying is what she said because of lack of availability of drugs in Wales. She cannot change her tune now. And can I say, she mentions the person She mentions that... No, don't try and speak on her behalf, please. I'll ask the Leader of the Opposition. She's well able to speak on her own behalf. The point to make is she makes reference to a particular case of somebody who is allegedly going to move to England to access a drug in the Cancer Drugs Fund. That drug is being axed from the Cancer Drugs Fund on the 12th of March in England. So it will not be available on the Cancer Drugs Fund in England anyway from the 12th of March. So that's not going to help the unfortunate person involved. They should have done the research on that, and they would have known this particular drug is being moved from the Cancer Drugs Fund in England within a fortnight, and that drug will then not be available via the Cancer Drugs Fund in England. So, again, I make this point. It is absurd to say, as the Prime Minister has said, that somehow people are being denied life-saving drugs and are dying in Wales. That is wrong, and I challenge the Conservative Party to give us a single example of a life-saving drug that is not available in Wales. They will fall far short on that, as they always do.
Alan Fred Jones.
Thank you very much. I don't think that the family of Mr Irfon Williams will thank you for the kind of debate that we've just had on this particular case. Mr Irfon Williams is the father of a baby who is being cared for by a cancer specialist at Aintree Hospital in Liverpool, and it's that specialist that has made the request for the drug Cetuximab. Now, the Betws Health Board has rejected that application and rejected a second too. My question is, shouldn't difficult cases with this be dealt with at an all-Wales level rather than being left to the whim, or rather not at a whim, but be left to local health boards in order to ensure consistency and fairness?
Well, first of all, may I say to the member that I believe that it's true that sometimes discussions take place where we forget the individual, and of course this would not be the way in which I would have wished his case to be raised in this assembly. It was the choice of the person who posed the question. We are dealing with an individual who is suffering with a serious cancer. The point is, of course, that things are no different in England as to Wales, and of course I accept that that is no help to us, but it is a fair question about whether we should have uniformity throughout the whole of Wales. I think there is strength in the point that the member is making, and of course we must consider the system that we have in Wales that deals with these requests, and I am certain that the case of Irfon Williams and other individuals will be considered when we improve the system here in Wales.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. What steps have been taken by the Welsh Government to improve eye care for South Wales Central patients?
Well, in January, we published the Ophthalmic Planned Care Plan to ensure sustainable ophthalmic services for the future, and local eye care groups have been established and funding committed to improve eye care services for patients in South Wales Central.
Thank you, First Minister, for that answer. One of the issues in the research that I've done around eye services across Wales, but in particular in South Wales Central, is the issue of cancelled appointments. In South Wales Central, for example, they've gone up by 45% in 2 years. I think you'll agree with me that's a dramatic change of picture from what patients would expect to be able to, when they're given an appointment, to have that appointment carried out. If that level of cancellation rate continues, obviously that's going to put huge pressure on eye services. RNIB identified that the tariff system that you've moved to as well as of November last year is putting inordinate pressure over the funding of the services. Will you undertake as a government to look into the delivery of eye services, in particular in South Wales Central, to get on top of the cancellation rates, but above all to make sure the tariff rate that you offer is suitable to meet the need of patients across South Wales Central?
Well, first of all, I know the Chief Medical Officer, for example, visited the RNIB very recently to meet with patients and to listen to their concerns. In terms of the tariff system, that is something we believe that is certainly more than adequate at this moment in time. He does make reference to a particular problem that existed at Ysbyty Cwm Rhondda over the summer, where there were cancellations and a limited service, more limited service than normal was available. I understand that arrangements have been put in place since for patients to be seen Additional nurse recruitment has been undertaken, and now the backlog of patients requiring immediate treatment and the waiting time, for example, for wet AMD macular treatments is now within the 2-week guidance, but we will of course continue to monitor the situation.
Thank you, First Minister. We now move to item 2, which is